Hello, Mr. Freelon. Yeah, I know I look like a little bit like a chud, and I also, because I just played tennis for like a long time at a tennis tournament, I got second place. We almost got first. We almost got a plaque, but we got a medal instead because we lost. But now I'm gonna show y'all my booklet. So that's fine. All right, this is my cover page. This is Unit 1, or the Subunit 1, and it's about stratospheric ozone depletion and reducing it. So this is my key vocab, and some of it is like UV radiation, Montreal Protocol, polar stratospheric clouds, stuff like that. And then this whole subunit is about the ozone. So this is my image. I drew the ozone absorbing the UV radiation. My questions were, what causes ozone depletion? How do CFCs damage the ozone? And why is reducing ozone depletion important? I did all that I answered all of it right here. There you go. And then next is the greenhouse effect. This is the greenhouse effect. So the greenhouse effect, for my key vocab, I did stuff like greenhouse gases, methane, infrared radiation, reduction. Oh wait, yeah, infrared radiation and global warming. And then, so the summary of it is the greenhouse gas effect, which is 9.3 by the way. It basically just traps heat in the atmosphere. So then I kind of did that with my image. I showed how some heat stays in the atmosphere, some of it goes out. Some of the energy goes in and out. And then my questions were, what is the greenhouse effect? How does the atmosphere affect temperature? And why is an increased greenhouse effect a problem? Then I answered those questions down here. For example, for the what is the greenhouse effect, I said the greenhouse effect is the process when gases in the atmosphere trap warm carbon. That brings us to 9.4. I did it in blue. 9.4 is all about the increases in greenhouse gases. So I went through stuff in my key vocab like fossil fuels, carbon footprint, nitrous oxide, industrialization, and anthropogenic. I thought anthropogenic was a useful term to include because it shows how some of the carbon emissions are by us and some carbon emissions are just naturally occurring. An interesting fact is that methane actually has a higher GWP than carbon dioxide, which makes sense because it stays in the atmosphere longer and it also traps more heat than CO2. So to show the increases in greenhouse gases, I drew deforestation as my real world example because deforestation gets rid of most of the trees, and therefore the trees can't do photosynthesis and takes carbon out of the atmosphere. And then my questions were the main sources of greenhouse gases, how deforestation increases greenhouse gases, and why does increased greenhouse gas affect climate. And for example, one of my answers for the explain why increased greenhouse gases affect climate, I said increased greenhouse gases traps more heat in the atmosphere, causing global warming and changing climate patterns. Now we're on 9.5. 9.5 is about global climate change, and so my key vocab was stuff about like disease vectors, the albedo effect, extreme weather, carbon emissions, ocean currents, stuff like that. Just to let you know, ocean currents is affected by the melting of fresh water from ice sheets and can disrupt thermohaline core circulation. An interesting fact is that some animals are being forced to die or adapt because their habitats are changing from global climate change. And this is my picture. It shows that this is where coastal cities are, and this is the old water level, and this is the rising water level. As you can see, water levels are rising because of the global warming. And my questions were, identify what is the global climate, describe this effects of climate change, and why is climate change a global problem. And these are my answers down here. This is coral bleaching up here, and I used that for ocean warming, the subunit. So ocean warming is 9.6, and basically it's about how the ocean gets warmer. So for example, I included terms like coral bleaching, marine ecosystems, ocean warming, thermal expansion, metabolic stress, and migration. For example, thermal expansion is when ocean water warms, melts, and spreads further, and the sea levels rise. For a summary, I put stuff like the warming drives sea levels to rise through thermal expansion. Greenhouse gases have led to a significant rise in global water temperatures. My interesting fact was that the ocean absorbs more than 90% of the excess heat from global warming. And I showed you my coral bleaching already. And my questions were: identify what is the ocean warming, describe how ocean warming affects marine life, and explain why ocean warming contributes to sea levels rise. And I answered those down here. All right, next we're on the acidification of the ocean, which is 9.7. So 9.7 is all about acidification, carbonic acid, carbonate ions, carbon sinks, anthropogenic CO2 emissions, and calcifiers. So that was all my key vocab right here. And an interesting fact is that even small changes in ocean pH can have horrible consequences for marine life, because some marine life has narrow ranges of tolerances. And I demonstrated that with my real life example, because it shows that as the pH rises because of CO2 and ocean acidification, the fish had to die. Sad. But here are my questions, my identify, describe, explain, and my answers are right here. Next is the invasive species. So invasive species is 9.8, and basically the key vocab was that I picked was invasive species, native species, non-native, exotic species, generalist species, R-selected species, and niche overlap. And all those species, are pretty obvious because they're invasive species topic. But I included niche overlap because niche overlap is kind of significant because it shows that two species can be totally different, but they can require the same resources. And that leads to how some species that are non-native can be invasive. So an interesting fact is that some marine species some invasive species are introduced by accident through solutions to other problems, like the cane toads we already discussed in class. And another example I used was zebra mussels. Zebra mussels in the U.S. have spread rapidly, and they have harmed native aquatic species. And my questions were: identify what is an invasive species, describe how do invasive species affect native species, and explain why invasive species are a bad thing for ecosystems. So for example, my question that explain is: invasive species often have no natural predators in their environments, leading to severe overpopulation. Next, that brings me to 9.9, which is the endangered species unit. And basically the essential question for this one, I realize I missed most of the essential questions, but the essential question for this one is: can you explain how species are endangered and the strategies to combat the problem? So for my key vocab, I went through stuff like key selected species, selective pressure, habitat fragmentation, pollution, the Lacey Act, and the Endangered Species Act. So I included the legislation because I felt that it was important to know these, because it shows how we're coming up with solutions to protect endangered species. So for example, the Endangered Species Act is when the U.S. prohibited taking, which is harming or killing, listed species and protected critical habitats. So for this, I used the giant panda because it used to be at risk for dying off, but it's improved since then. And for my questions, I used: can you identify an endangered species? Can you describe what causes species to become endangered? And my last one was: explain why is it important to protect endangered species. And for example, my describe, which is here, this one, my describe answer was: causes include poaching, invasive species, small range of tolerance, and climate change. And that brings us to the last one, which is 9.10. 9.10 is all about human impacts on biodiversity. So the essential question for this one was: can you explain how human activities affect biodiversity and strategies to combat the problem? So for my key vocab, I use species richness, species evenness, genetic diversity, background extinction rate, and restoration ecology. And I included these terms because this shows how we are affecting all these different factors in the ecosystems. So my summary was that humans have a major impact on biodiversity. Activities like deforestation and pollution harm ecosystems. Population of species is reduced by urbanization. Construction efforts have helped to protect biodiversity, and that climate change affects habitats and animals. So for my interesting fact, I said that human actions can both harm and help biodiversity depending on how we manage the environment. So for my picture, I used urbanization and industrialization. I mean, not urbanization, industrialization, because this is one of the ways that we can hurt the environment. And for my identify, I said, what is biodiversity? For my describe, I said, how can you describe how humans negatively impact biodiversity? And my last one was, can you explain why is protecting biodiversity important? And I'll just share my identify one. For my identify, I said biodiversity is the variety of different species in an ecosystem. And that's my book. Thanks.